Something happened at Skinwalker Ranch that nobody is talking about. The cameras stopped rolling. Experiments that had been running for months were suddenly halted. Crew schedules were wiped clean, and the silence that followed wasn't the comfortable quiet of a production break. It was the heavy silence of something gone terribly wrong. The timeline is crucial to understanding what happened. In late spring of last year, production was in full swing. The team had scheduled a series of experiments designed to test a hypothesis they'd been developing over multiple seasons, that specific locations on the ranch responded to electromagnetic stimulation in ways that suggested intelligence or at least complex reactive systems. Camera crews were on site daily. Travis Taylor and the scientific team were running constant tests. Eric Bard was analyzing data streams in real time. Dragon, the ranch's security chief, was monitoring the perimeter. Everything was normal. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early June, everything changed. Filming stopped mid-experiment. Not paused, stopped. Equipment was powered down. The crew was sent home, and the official explanation was deliberately vague. Technical difficulties requiring assessment. But here's what made people suspicious. Production crews know the difference between a normal pause and an emergency shutdown. In normal circumstances, you finish the day's shoot, wrap equipment properly, schedule the next session. This was different. Sources close to the production describe it as abrupt. One moment cameras were rolling, the next everyone was being asked to leave immediately. Experiments that had taken weeks to set up were abandoned mid-process. The crew schedules tell the story. Up until that Tuesday, every day for the following month was blocked for filming. By Wednesday morning, those schedules were completely cleared. No explanations, no new dates, just blank calendars and a memo about indefinite postponement pending further review. People who'd worked in television production for decades said they'd never seen anything quite like it. The speed, the totality, the lack of communication. Perhaps most telling was the simultaneous silence from everyone involved. Travis Taylor, who regularly engaged with fans on social media, went quiet about ranch activities. Brandon Fugel, the ranch's owner who'd been open about experiments, stopped discussing current investigations. Crew members who used to share behind-the-scenes photos suddenly posted nothing from the ranch. It was coordinated, deliberate, the kind of silence that comes with NDAS and serious legal implications. This wasn't planned downtime. Production breaks are announced. Seasonal gaps are expected. This was something else entirely. A full stop in the middle of active investigation, leaving equipment in place and experiments unfinished. Whatever happened that Tuesday didn't just pause the show. It changed the entire trajectory of how the ranch would be investigated going forward. The experiment that preceded the shutdown was relatively routine by Skinwalker Ranch standards. The team was conducting electromagnetic testing in an area known for high strangeness, using a combination of RF spectrum analyzers, magnetometers, and high-speed cameras. They'd done similar tests dozens of times. This should have been unremarkable. What made this different was the consistency of the anomaly. In past experiments, strange readings would appear briefly, spike, then disappear. Interesting, but inconclusive. This time, multiple instruments detected the same phenomenon simultaneously, not just one sensor malfunctioning or picking up interference. Every piece of equipment, calibrated independently, registered identical anomalies at precisely the same time. According to sources familiar with the data, the readings didn't match any known category. It wasn't standard electromagnetic interference from power lines or radio towers. The signature was completely different. It wasn't geological activity. Seismographs showed no corresponding movement. It wasn't atmospheric. Weather conditions were stable. And it wasn't equipment failure, because once they swapped in backup instruments, the readings continued unchanged. But here's what really disturbed the team. The anomaly had structure. It wasn't random noise or chaotic signals. It showed patterns. Repetition, sequences that suggested organization. One researcher, speaking anonymously, described it as looking less like natural phenomena and more like data transmission, as if something was broadcasting on frequencies they happened to be monitoring. The data was concerning because it didn't fit into comfortable categories. UAPs can be explained away as misidentified aircraft or atmospheric phenomena. Geological anomalies can be attributed to unique mineral compositions or underground structures. Electromagnetic interference can be blamed on equipment or distant sources. But data showing clear structure, perfect synchronization across multiple independent systems, and patterns that suggested intentional organization, that was something different entirely. This wasn't interesting data that would make for a compelling episode. This was concerning data that made scientists stop and reconsider whether they should be conducting these experiments at all. Because if something was responding to their tests, if something was broadcasting back, then the fundamental assumption underlying the investigation was wrong. They weren't just observing passive phenomena. They were interacting with something something active. The data review session that followed the experiment revealed something that shouldn't have been possible. Conflicting readings that violated basic physics were appearing simultaneously. Instruments detecting electromagnetic fields in ranges that should have required massive power sources, yet thermal imaging showed no heat signatures. Radiation detectors registering particles that left no trace on film or digital sensors. Audio equipment picking up frequencies below human hearing range, but sound pressure meters showing no corresponding waves. Scientists on the team started using a term they'd avoided throughout the entire investigation: impossible. Not unlikely, not unexplained, impossible, because the data sets were mutually exclusive. If instrument A was correct, instrument B's readings couldn't exist. If instrument B was functioning properly, instrument A's data violated known laws. Yet both were calibrated correctly, both were functioning as designed, and both were recording contradictory realities. Then came the detail that made everyone stop talking and start genuinely worrying. The signals didn't stop when they shut down the equipment. Standard protocol after capturing interesting data is to power everything down, verify the anomaly disappears, then power back up to see if it returns. This helps eliminate the possibility that your own equipment is creating the phenomena you're trying to measure. They shut down every piece of electronic equipment on the ranch. Generators, computers, sensors, everything. The baseline readings should have dropped to near zero. Instead, the signal persisted. Not as strong, but definitely present, which meant whatever they were detecting existed independent of their observation. It was there whether they were measuring it or not. And somehow, impossibly, their instruments were still detecting it even when powered off. But the truly disturbing realization came when they analyze the pattern over time. The signal wasn't random, it wasn't consistent, it was adaptive. During the first hour of testing, it appeared in one frequency range. When they focused their instruments on that range, it shifted to another. When they broadened their monitoring, it split across multiple frequencies. It was as if something was testing their capabilities, learning what they could detect, adjusting its behavior accordingly. This crossed a fundamental line in scientific investigation. You can study phenomena that don't understand they're being studied. Weather doesn't know you're measuring it. Geological formations don't care about your seismographs. But if something is responding to observation, if it's adjusting behavior based on how you're measuring it, then you're not conducting passive research anymore. You're engaged in an interaction, and interactions can go both ways. Before this experiment, safety concerns at Skinwalker Ranch focused on practical matters. Don't stand under the drilling rig. Wear protective equipment during rocket launches. Maintain safe distances from high-powered laser and RF equipment. Standard industrial safety protocols for the kind of testing they were conducting. But after this data came back, the conversation about safety changed fundamentally. Medical monitoring of team members had been routine throughout the investigation. Blood work, basic physicals, standard stuff to ensure nothing on the ranch was causing obvious health problems. But in the days following this particular experiment, several team members reported symptoms that couldn't be easily explained. Severe headaches that lasted for days, sleep disruption, vivid dreams that multiple people described in eerily similar terms, a general sense of unease that persisted even after leaving the property. One researcher described it as feeling watched, even at home, hundreds of miles from the ranch. Another reported technology malfunctions that started after the experiment. Phones dying randomly, computers crashing, electrical systems in his house behaving strangely. Were these symptoms connected to the experiment, psychosomatic responses to fear, or something else? The team couldn't say with certainty, and that uncertainty was itself concerning. Dr. Travis Taylor, who'd been advocating for increasingly aggressive testing to provoke responses, suddenly started talking about protocols and caution. Sources say he had conversations with Brandon Fugel about whether they were exposing the team to something they didn't understand and couldn't protect against. Not physical danger. You can wear protective gear and maintain safe distances. But psychological or neurological effects that might not show up on standard medical tests. The phrase that kept coming up in internal discussions was informed consent. Everyone on the team had agreed to investigate strange phenomena. They'd signed waivers acknowledging physical risks, but nobody had consented to exposure to something that might affect consciousness or cognition in ways medical science couldn't predict or treat. How do you get informed consent when neither you nor your subjects understand what you're dealing with? This was the moment when the investigation stopped being about discovery and became about exposure, about whether pushing for answers was worth potential harm to the people doing the pushing, and critically, about whether continuing to provoke responses was making things worse. Because if the phenomena could adapt, if it could respond, if it could somehow affect people even after they left the property, then every every experiment wasn't just gathering data. It was escalating an interaction that nobody fully understood. Anyone who's watched the show closely over multiple seasons can see the shift. Certain locations on the ranch that were featured prominently in early episodes quietly disappeared from later investigations. Not because they stopped being interesting, because they became too concerning to continue studying with cameras rolling and crew members present. One area in particular, a section near the East Field, was the focus of intense investigation in the first 2 seasons. High radiation readings, strange lights, equipment malfunctions, classic Skinwalker Ranch phenomena. Then, after a specific incident that was filmed but never aired, that zone was quietly removed from the rotation. Experiments started happening everywhere else on the property. That particular location stopped appearing in episodes. The official explanation, when fans noticed, was simple. They were exploring other areas of the ranch to get more comprehensive data. But people familiar with the production tell a different story. After the incident, a decision was made at the highest levels that this area would be monitored remotely only. No personnel on site during active phenomena, no film crews. The zone wasn't abandoned because it was uninteresting. It was cordoned off because it was too active. What makes avoidance revealing is context. Throughout the show's run, the team has deliberately put themselves in uncomfortable situations, flying helicopters in areas known for equipment failure, digging in zones with radiation concerns, conducting experiments that they knew might trigger reactions. These aren't people who scare easily or avoid risk. So when they collectively decide that a location is off limits for direct investigation, it tells you something significant happened there. Sources describe the incident that led to the decision as a near miss, not physical danger in the traditional sense. No one was injured, but something happened during filming that made everyone present extremely uncomfortable. Multiple crew members refused to return to that specific area. Insurance concerns were raised, and Brandon Fugel made the call that whatever data they might gather wasn't worth the risk to personnel. The lesson here is important. Some areas aren't off limits because they're empty or explained away. They're restricted because they're too full of activity that nobody wants to interact with up close anymore. Observation from a distance is one thing. Direct exposure is something else entirely. And the decision to maintain distance after years of aggressive investigation speaks volumes about what they experienced in that zone. One of the strangest aspects of the shutdown involves the delayed reaction to footage. During filming, everyone on site was focused on equipment, data streams, and immediate observations. The atmosphere was professional, scientific, controlled. Yes, strange things happened, but in the moment, with cameras rolling and a job to do, people stayed focused on documentation. The unease came later, during the review sessions when editors started going through raw footage frame by frame, when producers watched everything that had been captured without the distraction of being on site. That's when people started seeing things that nobody noticed during actual filming. Details in the background, patterns in the data visualizations, sequences that didn't make sense when viewed in isolation, but became disturbing when seen in context. One editor described the experience as watching something change the longer you looked at it. He'd review a segment, mark it for inclusion, then come back to it hours later and see something different. Not literally different, the footage hadn't changed, but his perception of what was happening in the frame had shifted. Details that seemed insignificant during the first viewing became prominent. Patterns emerged that he couldn't unsee once noticed. Multiple crew members reported that reviewing footage affected them more than being on the ranch during filming, which doesn't make logical sense. You'd think direct exposure would be more impactful than watching recorded video in a comfortable editing bay. But the repeated viewing, the ability to pause and examine frames, the process of trying to understand what they'd captured, that's what got under people's skin. Then came the reports from people who worked on the footage off-site, away from the ranch entirely. Editors in Los Angeles, color correction specialists in New York, sound designers who never set foot in Utah. They started reporting strange experiences, dreams about the ranch, a sense of being observed while working on specific segments, technology problems that seemed concentrated around footage from particular experiments. This is where things get genuinely unsettling. If phenomena could somehow extend beyond the physical location through recorded media, then documentation wasn't a safe distance observation anymore. It was a vector. Every copy of the footage, every hard drive, every review session, potentially extending whatever was happening at the ranch to people who'd never been there. The real shock didn't come from being present during the experiments. It came from trying to understand what had been captured afterward. Networks shut down productions for predictable reasons. Budget overruns, declining ratings, cast conflicts, safety violations, standard entertainment industry issues that happen all the time and get resolved through normal business processes. What happened with Skinwalker Ranch wasn't any of those things. The show was profitable, ratings were strong, the team worked well together. By every conventional metric, production should have continued. But there's a difference between a ratings problem and a liability problem. Ratings can be fixed with better marketing or format changes. Liability issues, especially ones ones involving crew health and safety, require immediate action and careful legal review. When multiple people start reporting psychological effects, when medical concerns arise, when insurance companies start asking questions, that's when network executives get involved directly. Sources within the network describe a series of high-level meetings that happened in the days following the shutdown. Legal teams were consulted, insurance carriers were notified, medical professionals were brought in to evaluate crew members. This wasn't creative executives discussing storylines. This was risk management trying to understand potential exposure and liability. The decision to pause production came from above the show's production team. Brandon Fugal owns the ranch and could have continued private investigations. The core team wanted to keep working. But when a network's corporate structure gets involved, when lawyers start reviewing what happened rather than producers, that signals a fundamental shift from entertainment concerns to legal and safety concerns. What makes this shutdown different from past controversies or production problems is the speed and completeness. Past issues with paranormal shows have led to format changes or cast replacements. This led to a full stop. No announcements about retooling, no statements about when filming might resume, just vague mentions of technical issues and ongoing assessment, the kind of corporate language that indicates serious concerns being discussed privately while public statements remain deliberately uninformative. Someone higher up decided this shouldn't continue, at least not in its current form. Whether that decision was driven by genuine concern for crew safety, fear of legal liability, or something else entirely, we may never know. But the fact that it happened, that a successful show with strong ratings was shut down mid-season without clear explanation, tells you everything about how seriously this situation was taken at the highest corporate levels. Every reality show captures far more footage than ever makes it to air. For every hour of television, you might shoot 30 or 40 hours of raw material. Most of what gets cut is boring. Equipment setup, failed takes, conversations that don't advance the narrative. But sometimes footage gets cut for other reasons. Because it doesn't fit the show's format, because it raises questions the producers can't answer, because it's too ambiguous to include but too clear to completely dismiss. Skinwalker Ranch has an archive of footage that was never meant to be aired, experiments that produced results too strange to contextualize in a television format, moments where equipment behaved in ways that suggested either massive technical failure or phenomena beyond current explanation, crew reactions that were too genuine, too unsettled to fit the show's somewhat measured scientific tone. One particular piece of footage, described by multiple sources but never publicly released, shows an experiment where everything went wrong at once. Multiple equipment failures, data streams contradicting each other in real time, and in the background, something visible on thermal cameras that shouldn't have been there. Not a person, not an animal, something that registered heat in patterns that didn't match any known biological signature. The footage was reviewed extensively, enhanced, analyzed by multiple experts. The consensus was that it showed something real, something physical enough to register on multiple sensors, but what it showed couldn't be easily explained. It wasn't clear enough to definitively prove anything extraordinary, but it was too clear to dismiss as equipment malfunction or misidentification. It existed in the uncomfortable middle ground where debunking fails but proof remains elusive. The decision was made to keep this footage in the vault, not because it was boring or irrelevant, because silence can be a form of containment. If you can't explain something and you can't debunk it, sometimes the safest option is to not show it at all. Let people speculate about what might have been captured rather than giving them actual footage that raises more questions than it answers. This is where the shutdown becomes most interesting from a disclosure perspective. Everything that aired on the show was carefully curated to be compelling but ultimately explainable within the show's framework. Mysterious but not definitively proven. The footage that never aired, that sits in archives under legal protection and non-disclosure agreements, that might tell a very different story. Not everything is debunked by science and skepticism. Some things are simply buried because they don't fit into comfortable narratives about what's possible. The question everyone asks is whether the ranch is still active without cameras, whether experiments continue privately, whether the phenomena that made Skinwalker Ranch famous persist when nobody is watching or documenting. The answer, based on everything we can piece together, is yes. Activity continues, investigation continues, but the nature of how it's being studied has fundamentally changed. Brandon Fugal has made it clear the ranch remains a focus of serious scientific investigation, but that investigation is happening differently now. More remote monitoring, more automated data collection, less direct human presence during active phenomena. The shift suggests lessons learned from whatever led to the shutdown. That proximity to certain events carries risks that can be mitigated through distance and technological intermediation. The patterns observed over years of investigation suggest that whatever happens at Skinwalker Ranch doesn't depend on human observation. The phenomena existed before the show. They'll exist after. Cameras and scientific instruments might make the events visible and documentable, but they don't create them, which raises an uncomfortable question. If filming stops but activity continues, what was the investigation actually accomplishing besides documentation? Some researchers argue that aggressive investigation, deliberately provoking responses, attempting to trigger phenomena through experimentation, might have escalated whatever exists there. That each rocket launch, each drilling operation, each electromagnetic pulse wasn't just observing passive phenomena, but actively engaging with something responsive, and that engagement potentially made things worse. The shutdown might represent a recognition that the paradigm was wrong. You can't treat intelligent, responsive phenomena like laboratory subjects. You can't provoke and measure something that might be measuring you back. The scientific method works beautifully for studying things that don't know they're being studied. It becomes problematic when the subject of investigation is aware of the observer and potentially capable of responding in ways that affect the observer. Looking forward, Skinwalker Ranch will likely remain an active research site, but the research will be more cautious, more respectful of boundaries that weren't clear until they were crossed, less focused on making compelling television, and more concerned with understanding phenomena without unnecessarily escalating interaction. Because the ultimate lesson of the shutdown is simple. Stopping observation doesn't stop activity, but it might stop whatever consequences come from aggressive investigation of things we don't yet understand.